sky, ashes falling like rain. The world screams, but no one's alive. Everything burns, everything dies. Smoke in my lungs, fire in my eyes. Everything burns, it's all a lie.
Starting a company and first expenses. When launching any business, especially in the creative or digital production space, it often feels like you can get by with a minimal set of resources. But very quickly it becomes clear that technical equipment isn't a luxury. It's a foundational tool that directly affects the speed, quality, and consistency of your output. In my case, this became obvious almost immediately after I brought on my first team member. He already had design experience and a strong desire to grow. We were aligned in terms of approach, he understood the style, and he jumped into tasks quickly. But in practice, his old computer, one he'd been using since college, just couldn't handle the volume of work coming in. Every export, every revision, every time he opened a heavy file, it all came with delays, lags, and, most importantly, a loss of rhythm. In creative work, the pace matters. When one team member can't respond quickly, it slows down not just their work, but the entire chain. Deadlines get pushed, approvals are delayed, and ultimately, the client experience suffers. Of course, we could have left things as they were, ignoring the technical issues and counting on goodwill, but I realized that would be a slow decline. Instead of moving forward, we'd constantly be using energy to overcome avoidable obstacles. So I decided to buy a new computer. That was the first major expense, not something like an office supply, but a real investment in the quality of our work. Its cost was roughly equal to a month's payroll, and in essence, it was a choice between short-term financial comfort and long-term stability. At that point, I didn't have steady income yet, nor any payment predictability. But that step sent a strong signal to both myself and the team member. He understood that I didn't see him as a temporary assistant, but as part of our shared future. And I was able to build at least one system element where the tools weren't the bottleneck and the person could focus on the result. That experience taught me a simple truth. Equipment is a way to remove barriers. When someone has everything they need to do their job, they engage with the work differently, without frustration, delays, or a sense of helplessness. You eliminate the blame the system variable, leaving only the human factor, motivation, skill, and attitude. That's when you can actually assess the person, not their gear. Once technical barriers are gone, you can start measuring real performance without distortion. Later, I ran into similar situations, especially as we expanded. Designers or editors would sometimes say, "My setup's barely holding on, but I'll manage." And every time, I'd go back to that first experience. If you want someone to work consistently and efficiently, give them the right conditions. It's not about luxury, it's about basic adequacy. You can't demand top results from tools that can't handle even the basics. And that applies not just to designers. Equipment matters. Equipment matters for managers, copywriters, and anyone who helps coordinate processes. Buying that first computer wasn't just a technical decision, it was a managerial milestone. I stopped thinking of the agency as just me and some helpers, and began seeing it as a structure, where everyone has their area of responsibility and everything should function. That's when the shift toward a systems-based mindset began, even if it was still on a minimal level. I see this experience as universal. Whether you're starting a business, a startup, or something in between, if you want to rely on people, you have to start by respecting the process, and that includes providing proper working conditions. Equipment is the first step. It's where everything begins. One of the core financial habits I developed almost immediately after making my first hires was the deliberate generation of a payroll fund with a buffer. It's not just about paying salaries on time, but about creating a reserve cushion that can cover at least one full payroll cycle, even if no client payments come in that month. This approach proved to be the only sensible strategy in the unstable world of creative business, where cash flow gaps aren't exceptions, they're practically guaranteed. When you're working solo, delayed payments are annoying but manageable. You can cut expenses, wait it out, take a freelance gig, or just go without a paycheck. But once you have employees, everything changes. They don't care whether the client has paid yet, how complex their approval process is, or how many last-minute revisions they sent. What they need is stability. They have rent, food, kids, and transportation to pay for. They have commitments, and your reputation as an employer depends entirely on your ability to meet those commitments. In my case, the need to build a reserve payroll fund came up almost immediately. My first employee joined the project part-time, and the workload varied, but even then I understood, you can't leave someone financially dependent on a client's whims. I knew our anchor client had a built-in payment delay. Officially, the contract allowed them 30 business days after signing the work completion report. But in reality, that deadline was almost never met. Inside their ERP system, the process looked like this. First approval by one department, then another, and so on through a chain of 9 people. Each of them was formally allowed to hold the document for up to 5 business days. If anyone went on vacation, got sick, or simply forgot, the process stalled for weeks. There were cases when a report I signed at the beginning of the month didn't get paid until the next quarter. This isn't a unique story. Many large companies operate like this. The bigger the structure, the slower everything moves. Which means, if you work with corporate clients and don't build in a buffer, you become a hostage to their rhythm. You might feel like you have lots of work and even a sizable amount invoiced, but if the money isn't coming in on time, you lose the ability to manage your business. At first, I simply tried to save a portion of incoming payments just in case. Later, this turned into a formalized metric. The payroll reserve had to be at least 1 full month's worth for all employees. This fat became a safety buffer. It allowed us to get through payment delays, calmly handle periods of low workload, and, most importantly, avoid panic when a cash gap loomed on the horizon. I knew, even if no payments came in over the next 4 weeks, my people would still get paid. In my spreadsheet, I always marked the amount equivalent to 1 month's payroll as our mandatory minimum. When a second, then a third employee joined, I had to reassess the reserve. It was no longer enough to just have a buffer. I needed to understand how it was built. I started keeping a spreadsheet: how much was required per month, how much we had in reserve, what the forecasted income was, and how long we could sustain operations with 0 revenue. This approach gave me peace of mind. Even during tough times, when 3 clients delayed payments at once, I never had to ask the team to wait or reduce salaries. Beyond financial stability, the payroll reserve also has psychological value. Team members can sense when leadership is shaky. They feel the anxiety, tension, and uncertainty. Conversely, if they sense things are under control, trust remains high even during difficult periods. This directly affects motivation, retention, and work quality. People don't worry about being laid off tomorrow and can focus on delivering results. A reserve also allows for strategic decision-making rather than survival mode. For example, if you have a buffer, you don't have to take on urgent, unprofitable projects just to cover payroll. You can give a new hire time to adapt without demanding immediate output, or walk away from a toxic client when necessary. Without a reserve, those moves are nearly impossible. You're forced to say yes to everything just to stay afloat. Even now, with a larger agency and more regular income, I stick to this habit. It's not a vague, rainy day fund. It's a concrete risk management strategy. It helps you survive tough months while maintaining your reputation, operational control, and internal discipline. Stability is hard to come by in the service business. If you're just starting out, my only advice is don't spend everything that comes in, even if you're tempted to upgrade, expand, or invest. Fund payroll first. Everything else comes second. A 1-month payroll reserve isn't a luxury. It's the minimum level of responsibility toward those working with you. It's what separates a chaotic freelance setup with assistance from a real agency. Working with corporate clients almost always involves complex internal procedures. Even if the contract states exact payment terms, they're often doubled or tripled in reality. I had a client whose task completion form had to be signed by 9 employees from different departments, each with up to 5 business days to review. Any business trip, sick leave, or vacation, and the process stalled for weeks, even if there were no issues with the work itself. This isn't unusual. In large organizations, speeding up the approval chain is often impossible, especially if you're not working directly with the owner, but through a department. That's why cash flow on the contractor's side isn't just a safety measure. It's essential for stable operations. The financial cushion becomes more than just a theory. It becomes a way to stay in control. A 1 to 2 month buffer is what allows you to wait calmly for payments, even amid delays, especially once you've hired your second or third employee and now carry responsibility for more than just yourself. A stable partner may provide a steady stream of tasks, but that comes with the caveat of depending on their internal pace. It's better to anticipate this and build a safety margin into your expense planning. Sooner or later, especially as your company begins to grow, the question arises: should you keep working remotely or rent an office? In my case, this transition didn't happen because I wanted a pretty picture for clients, but for entirely practical reasons. A second and third team member had joined. Project chats were sprawling across messengers, access links were getting lost, and more discussions required live interaction. The office became a logical response to a situation where the remote model could no longer keep up with the pace and workload. The first thing to understand is that an office isn't just a space. It's a new line of fixed expenses: utilities, internet, furniture, cleaning, and sometimes security or administrative services. These costs don't fluctuate with your revenue, so rent must be treated as a constant financial commitment. At the same time, an office becomes a coordination point. It helps level out the rhythm, speeds up approvals, and reduces background tension caused by misunderstandings in chats. Even a modest space can shape a real work culture, one expressed through reactions, clarifications, and daily interactions. On a tight budget, the office should be purely functional. There's no need to rent a designer space downtown. What matters more is accessibility, reliable internet, the ability to take private calls, and basic workstations. At first, we managed with just a couple of rooms, a few desks, and minimal equipment. The focus was on the work itself. People came not for the atmosphere, but because they wanted to grow professionally. Renting an office marked a shift from a temporary setup to a more sustainable model. As long as everyone's working from apartments or cafes, there's a lingering sense of impermanence, even if you're trying to build processes. Once you get your own space, the team starts feeling that the project is becoming something bigger. This influences discipline, engagement, and even trust from clients, especially when they can visit, meet in person, and discuss a project at a real table, not through a screen. There's a flip side, too. An office is a commitment. With remote work, you can survive a dip in workload just by shifting schedules. With an office, every month brings fixed bills. you need to honestly assess whether you're ready to take on that risk. In my case, it only became possible after hiring someone who could take on part of the management workload. I agreed with him that he'd gather the team and organize the day-to-day around himself. That way, we built a system where I worked with him and he worked with the rest of the team. It freed me from having to handle every issue alone and allowed me to develop new directions in parallel. Moving into an office wasn't just a physical relocation. It was an internal turning point. Until then, I had been adapting constantly, maneuvering between tasks and challenges. Afterward, I began building. The office had doors. The projects had structure. It didn't guarantee peace, but it created a foundation for the next stage of growth. In the early stages, when processes are still forming and every mistake can throw off deadlines or frustrate a client, choosing the right people becomes critical. At that point, it's hard to hire using classic criteria like resumes, portfolios, or previous agency experience. More often, hiring is based on something else: trust. Not in a romantic or intuitive sense, but in a practical one. Can you rely on this person? Do they understand what's expected? And are they personally motivated to get involved? When you're a small team, each person has a huge impact. One disengaged employee or one poorly executed project, and you're not just losing time, you're risking your reputation. That's why the first hires, especially if you can't offer high salaries or stable conditions, almost always come through personal connections. Former colleagues, trusted friends, or friends of the first employee. People who already know you and at least have a sense of your work style. That's exactly how it worked for me. My first employee wasn't just a contributor, he became a coordinator. We agreed he would bring in his people he trusted and was willing to vouch for. And surprisingly, that system worked well. Everyone understood the structure. I worked directly with him, and he worked with them. It didn't eliminate feedback or oversight, but it made communication easier. Everyone knew who to ask and where instructions came from. Hiring based on intuition doesn't mean skipping evaluation. These people may be familiar, but if they can't keep up or don't align with your principles, you have to let them go. Still, starting with people you know saves time and effort. You don't have to spend weeks on adaptation, lengthy interviews, or guessing their motivation. When there's already a connection, you can quickly tell whether someone fits your current needs. That's especially important when you don't yet have the budget or time buffer to take unnecessary risks. You can experiment with hiring methods later. For now, the less uncertainty in your team, the better your control. That's why, at this stage, empathy as a filter often works better than any resume. When the first team member joins, the rhythm changes. You're no longer alone in the system. But that doesn't make the system fully autonomous. Quite the opposite. You now take on a new role, not just as a doer and organizer, but also as a coordinator. At this point, it may feel like the workload has multiplied. Now you're responsible not only for your own output, but also for the quality, deadlines, and results of someone else's work. And this is exactly where the path to growth begins. The transition from 1 to 2 people isn't scaling. It's merely the first step toward it. But when the team grows to 3, 4, 5 people, new challenges arise. Early on, everything can be discussed directly in any chat. But at this stage, structure becomes necessary. Who's responsible for what? How tasks are assigned? How agreements are tracked? How revisions and reports are handled? Growth forces you to organize processes, even if that wasn't part of your original plan. In my case, expansion happened gradually, without rush. The second and third employees came through the first one, by his initiative and with his involvement. We agreed from the start that he would handle not only task delegation, but also onboarding. He explained things, guided others, aligned approaches. I stayed informed, but didn't intervene in every micro process. This helped maintain both rhythm and stability. Everyone knew the hierarchy, while informal, was clear. It minimized confusion and sped up engagement. New hires usually coincide with a surge in workload, so much that you can't manage alone anymore, and even your first assistant starts working at full capacity. At the same time, you often don't yet have the resources for a full hiring cycle via the open market. So people still join through personal networks or recommendations. It's not always ideal, but at the early stage, it works. By the time you have 5 people, you begin to feel that you've formed at least a small department, a structure where roles are divided and discussions begin to happen without your direct involvement. One person may excel in presentation design, another in task formatting, another in handling client feedback quickly. This is a new level. It requires not just delegation, but the ability to let go. Manual control is no longer possible. You must design your relationships and workflows so that things keep moving even without your constant input. You're no longer a craftsman. You're a leader, responsible not only for the output, but for the matrix that produces it. Growing to 5 people isn't about the headcount. It's a mindset shift. You're no longer a freelancer with assistants. You're the head of a small studio. You're building something not just for yourself, but for others. This changes how you plan, how you approach responsibility, and how you manage your financial reserves. Previously, a drop in income could be handled by cutting personal expenses. Now, you're responsible for paying others, and every failure becomes a potential hit to the system. That's why real management decisions start to appear at this stage. Which projects to take, how to allocate time, when to say no so you don't overload the team. Growth isn't just about scaling up, it's also about new constraints. But when approached right, those constraints become a framework for building a real agency. As your business expands and projects run in parallel, it becomes obvious. Chaos no longer works. While everything is based on direct communication and ad hoc agreements, you can still get by manually. But the moment your task list grows beyond what you can mentally track, reality hits. You can't keep doing things this way. The shift towards structured management usually doesn't happen by design. It happens under pressure. Someone forgot to implement feedback. Someone else didn't ask a clarifying question. Someone was waiting for a final brief that never came. Everyone acted logically, but the result was a missed deadline or subpar delivery. These moments are markers. You need structure. You need systems, tools, and rules. That's when the first management elements emerge. Task tracking, first in notes, then in a spreadsheet, then maybe in a CRM. Client registration, file storage, contract templates, checklists, task-setting formats. It's not yet bureaucracy, but it's no longer total freedom either. Every decision is now made with 2 questions. How do I do this? And how can I repeat or delegate it later? For me, the turning point came when I started forgetting what stage a project was in, or wasted time re-explaining a task I used to just show. This wasn't about fatigue. It was the limit of manual productivity. From there, you have 2 choices: scale through systems or burn out, and drag others with you. Shifting into a management role isn't about spreadsheets or meetings. It's about understanding that your main task now isn't to do, it's to ensure things get done. Not to personally save every project, but to design processes that keep working without your constant presence. It's a tough shift, especially if you're used to being in the thick of everything, but it's unavoidable. At some point, you stop being the expert who can do everything themselves. You become a manager, in the good, practical sense. Expenses stop being seen as losses and start looking like investments, in people, in systems, in long-term outcomes. You begin to plan by the quarter instead of the week. You don't just look at workload,
you look at margins. You don't just think about how to get the job done, you consider how it affects the overall balance. Launching a business rarely feels like a sudden leap. It's more often a slow, sometimes chaotic transition, from freelancing to a system, from gut feeling to structure, from personal effort to shared responsibility. The first expenses become the first investments. The first hires become points of growth. The first failures become pivots towards stability. The key is not to get stuck at the stage where everything still depends on you alone, because beyond that is a different kind of quality. And everything you build during this period becomes the foundation for what comes next.